prison ministry can be one of the most challenging and the most rewarding types of ministry. And there are unique questions and issues with this type of calling. My guest today is Randall Ham, who has years of experience with ministering to incarcerated men. Randall Ham is a veteran of the United States Marine Corps and former Marine Drill Instructor who's passionate about ministering to incarcerated men through the Kairos Prison Ministry organization. He has also served as a member of his city's governmental body, worked in various volunteer organizations, and is an active member of his church. He resides in Alabama with his wife, Lisa, and we have a great conversation on the show today. So let's get started. Hey, Randall, thanks for being here today. We've got a pretty important conversation coming up, and I'm looking forward to talking with you.
Yeah, thanks for the invite, Warren. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah. So our topic today is ministering to incarcerated men, and that can be a pretty intense discussion. So where I'd love to start is just your own story of how you got into that, because generally kids, they're not in school thinking, you know what I want to do when I grow up? I want to minister to incarcerated men. So usually there's a story, usually there's a journey. So how did you get into this field? How did this become a passion of yours?
And that's a great question. And this passion is rooted, Warren, in my own past. As a former addict and a man who spent some time incarcerated, not a lot of time, but time enough. And I didn't really understand that during those times that was where the Lord was going to lead me. It was in about 2011, 2012 range that I had the opportunity from another friend who was going to do it to begin ministering in the local jail here in Fort Payne. And that wasn't really my plan. But as I went in and I began to connect with these guys and hear some of the stories, they were so similar to mine, where their addictions were rooted and kind of the journeys they had taken. And so I began ministering out here at the county jail here in DeKalb County, and then had the opportunity to get involved in ministry in the state prisons here in Alabama. And so I'm very involved in that as well, too. So, God He used my journey, my personal journey, to create this passion in me. And it's just what I do. It's who I am.
So is there any chance that when you were incarcerated yourself, this seed was getting planted then, or did it still come later?
No, I was still a member of the Church of the Heathen back then. No, that was nowhere on my radar. And even as I began my faith journey many years later, that seed had not been planted. It was just when that opportunity was presented to me, and I was kind of searching for what the Lord had for me and wanted from me, that seed began to sprout.
And what was that first opportunity? What was that first experience that you had then on this path here?
So there was a man in our church that I went to church with, and we'd become very good friends, and he too had been incarcerated. And he came up to me one day and he said, Randall, he said, I really feel this urge to go into the county jail out here and begin sharing hope and encouragement with the men out there based on, my story and what my journey has been. And I was like, well, man, I'd love to try that. I don't know, the interest sparked. And so we did, and he and I, his name's David, we did ministry together in that jail for several years before he moved to Louisiana.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. One of the things that comes up when as we're getting into this topic, as we start talking about this topic, is there are challenging questions, right? There are challenging issues when it relates to ministering to men in jail, in prison. Before going too deep, I still want to stay kind of at the high level. There's a stereotype that this world has about guys who are in prison, guys who are incarcerated. There's an image of who they are. These are all just bad men and deserve to be there, and all of those sorts of things. So how can a listener, how can somebody who's following our conversation here, what sort of stereotype that we might have about prisoners needs to be adjusted? How do we What would you recommend for those of us who have not been inside the system to think about this issue, think about these men?
Well, I think the first thing is that we all need to understand, Warren, that each and every one of us is always a single decision away from being right where those men are. And sometimes it wasn't a lifestyle, it wasn't a path they were on. It was a single decision that they made in their life that put them where they are.
Yeah.
And it doesn't make them bad people. You know, I tell people all the time, some of my closest, dearest friends in the world are convicted felons, and they're in prison, and some of them for life. But we just need to understand that that's somebody's son.
Yeah.
That's somebody's father. And more important than that, that is someone who God created with purpose.
Yeah.
And we just need to get past that. Well, like you said, they're all bad. They need to stay there forever. You know, there's no hope. There's no possibility of redemption, because I'm here to tell you from my personal experience and my personal interactions and relationships with some of the men that I have grown fond of and dear to. Redemption is absolutely possible.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like that you're referring to they're not just bad, I shouldn't say just, they're not bad men in the way we might think of it like that. A phrase I've used over the years is there will be people in heaven who have sinned differently than you.
Yes.
And we need to keep that in mind. It can be easy to create this boundary and say, here's the group of people outside and here are the group of people inside. None of us, other than Jesus, none of us have ever walked this earth perfectly. None of us have ever gone through this and not made mistakes. So yeah, I appreciate kind of how you were phrasing that and how you were wording that. And you talked there about the redemption part. What is redemption like? What's that like for somebody? You mentioned you have friends who they're going to be in jail for life. They'll be incarcerated for life.
Yes.
What does redemption look like for that guy? Because we think of, okay, he here's his release day. Now he's out. Now he's free, so to speak. But what about the guy who's in prison for life? How is redemption for him?
And that's a great question too, and it brings to mind what's going on down at St. Clair Correctional Facility here in Springville, Alabama. I think it comes first with them acknowledging what they did, and that's kind of the common thing that I hear, Warren, from the men who have been redeemed and who have turned their lives around, even if they are never going to walk out of that place, is that they acknowledge what I did was wrong. I deserved punishment, but I don't have to live under that punishment, even if I'm in prison. I can live free inside this prison through a relationship with Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Yeah. And how often do you feel, maybe you can't exactly, and I don't mean quantify, but just how many men get to that point where they feel that they feel like, okay, I'm in prison, I'm here for life, but I'm free?
Yeah, it's a larger number than what people might think, Warren.
Okay.
And I use St. Clair because that's the facility that I'm most familiar with and I'm most involved in. They have a church inside the prison. And the pastor who is serving life without parole is a very dear friend of mine. His name's Tommy Plunkett. He is very quick to remind people this is not a prison church. This is a church that just happens to be located inside a prison.
Yeah.
And it started out small. When I started going there several years ago, it started out, and there might be 25 or 30 men there in a prison population of 1,000 to 1,100, 1,200 in that range. So a very, very small percentage. But as that church began to reach the community inside, that church began to grow. And what was once 25 men is now very regularly 100 to 150 men trying to get in a space that will hold 100 men.
Yeah.
They'll stand outside the door to hear the word of God being proclaimed.
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
it's
I
growing.
love that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love hearing stories like that. The church that I belong to, we have a few different locations for the church, and we refer to it as our fifth location is inside a prison here in Colorado,
Yes.
and similar. It's pretty full every single Sunday. It's pretty full, and it's quite amazing to see how that works.
Yeah.
Have you noticed ever so much of Paul's writing, he's talking about prison and
Yes.
writing from prison.
Mm.
And does do you feel like that takes on a different perspective? Does that hit differently for the men who are in prison? Is there sort of an extra layer that somebody outside might not get out of much of what Paul wrote?
Um, yeah, that's an interesting question. I can say this, and I don't know if this answers your question, but I can say this. There are some extremely talented men in prison, uh, writers, preachers, theologians, musicians, and they're using these gifts to proclaim Jesus. Um, and it's coming from a place that no one on the outside would expect it to come from.
Yeah.
When I come out and I come out into the free world, and that's what we call it and they call it. When I go to a church to share, or I preach at my church, and I tell them about some of these writings these guys have done, and some of these songs these men have written, and the way that's being done from prison, it does hit differently for
Yeah.
them because today we don't see as much as that as we should in the free world. And here's again, my friend Tommy, his mission that the Lord has him on is to change the world from the inside out. In other words, raise up these men on the inside while they're in prison, and when they're released, then they go and be world changers.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Yeah. Yeah, that's we should all be seeking that. We should all be after that. What's and it's up to you whether you use names or not. You mentioned Tommy. What's another story of somebody who has gone through this process, maybe was as opposed as you could imagine at the beginning, went through this process of redemption, is either still serving or is out in the free world? What's a story maybe that you could share of somebody and the journey that they've been on?
Well, there are lots of them, um, lots more that I'm very aware of at the local level because I can interact with those guys, all
Yeah.
the time when they come out. Some of the guys in the state prisons, they go to different parts of the state, and I don't have as much personal interaction. Um, One example that came out of the county jail, and this is probably one of my favorite success stories of a man, and he's a friend of mine. His name is Gary Cootie, and I assure you, Gary would not at all be opposed to having his name used because he gives all the glory to God for what's happened.
Yeah.
I met Gary about 7 years ago, and he was incarcerated out here at DeKalb County. Gary had spent his entire life manufacturing methamphetamine out here in a remote part of our county. That was just what he did. Spent the
Mhm.
first 42 years of his life, well, 22 when he became an adult, that 20 plus years of his life opposed to the Lord, opposed to the law, opposed to society. He was just about whatever Gary could do to make a buck.
Yep.
And so I met Gary out in DeKalb County 7 years, 8 years ago, and there was something that drew us together. I know what something is, and I think you do too. I believe the Holy Spirit built a connection there between us, and we became friends. And as I would go in there and we would have our devotionals and share our messages afterwards, Gary and I would spend time together in conversation. And I learned about his life and about his journey and those things. And so when Gary came out, there were some folks who kind of gathered around him and helped him find a home and helped him find a job. What we were intentional in, was not letting him go back to his playground.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
We took him out of his playground, planted him in a new place, got him set up, and Gary began to do well. He made a couple of mistakes. He ends up back in jail for violation of his probation. So he was looking at some pretty serious time for that violation of his probation. But we had a judge here in DeKalb County who also saw something in Gary. And he told, he said, Gary, I'm going to give you one more chance to get this right. And so he did. And Gary got back out and never looked back. He went to a treatment. He went through an extended program, an inpatient thing, and then began to serve as a volunteer at this facility, at this treatment facility and halfway house. He got a job and he worked and he did all these things. And then he began to work on his education and he got his GED, and he had never had his GED, and he got his driver's license. He hadn't had a driver's license in 20 years. And the next thing you know, Gary becomes an employee of this facility. And we're in contact this whole time. And then Gary gets state certified as an addiction counselor. And begins to move up in this organization. And then he gets nationally certified as an addiction counselor. And now he's the intake coordinator at the place where he went to begin his recovery.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing how God does that, takes people full circle. I shared that our church has a campus that's inside prison.
Yes.
The pastor who preaches there the most was a prisoner in the Colorado prison system. And he talks about how it felt. He literally has the key to get into the prison that he was in. and how God can close that and create those loops, can close that stuff, can bring somebody back to where they were before. But it's just different in every possible way. You're a different person. You're a different man.
Yeah.
And, we needed those experiences to get us to where we are, but you're different. The scripture is supposed to change us. Walking with Jesus is supposed to change us. We're supposed to be different. We're not just supposed to be, just slightly better. And we go to church at Christmas and Easter. We're supposed to be different people.
That's right.
And that's what's so great about stories like that. And what you're sharing with Gary. I want to go ahead.
And now God is allowing Gary to help people who had his same journey.
Yeah.
And he's good at that because he knows.
Because he knows it. He lived it. Yeah. He understands it. Yeah.
He has worn those shoes. That's exactly right. So
yeah. Yeah. And can speak to experiences and to situations that somebody not in that world would be able to speak to.
And he's also pretty good at knowing when they're not being straight up with him.
Yeah, I would think so, right? That's sort of the difference between somebody with academic knowledge and somebody with real world knowledge. Like, yeah, you read that from a book. You're not. Yeah. Let me. I want to shift over to a more serious question. So, we're talking about redemption. We're talking about these men, and their lives being changed and so on. To bring it to a more serious topic, I'd love to get your thoughts on the victim's perspective here, or the family of the victim. Somebody might be listening to our conversation and say, hey, you guys are talking about all these great things, and this is not a bad man. It's just somebody who made one mistake and now he's redeemed and now he's living his life. But what about that? What about the victims, and what about the families? How should people from that side of the equation, as they're listening to what we're talking about today, what would you recommend to them? Because there can be some very hard hearts. So Absolutely. What would you recommend to them to think about as we're talking about these topics?
One of the things that I have learned that lives in the heart of these guys who are incarcerated, and especially for some of these very serious crimes that have been committed, is a desire to make peace with their victim's family, to help that heal, to heal that wound. And some families will receive it and some families will not. but that desire is in the hearts of the men who are seeking redemption and who are seeking a different life and a different path. That is top of their list, is to at least be able to apologize for what they've done and try to help the family heal. Not necessarily for themselves, but to help that family have some healing, knowing that there's that regret, that there's that remorse for what they've done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it is hard, you think about that and what it would be like to lose a family member. And, we're talking about murder, most of the men, unfortunately, in St. Clair, that's what they're there for. And to think about losing a family member at the hand of another person, um, as Christ followers, we think that forgiveness would just come because that's who we are. We're full of grace and we're full of forgiveness, but we're also full of emotion, and I understand that it can be difficult. I can't say what I would do, Warren. I
Sure.
know what I think I would say,
Yeah.
but I think the people who are in those situations should be aware that there is, in those men who are seeking that redemption, there is true remorse, there is true regret, and there is a true desire to help them heal.
Yeah. Yeah, I appreciate that, because it's definitely a hard conversation. It's definitely a hard part of this overall topic, because without the victim, so to speak, and I don't mean it to sound, I'm not trying to sound blunt, the guy's not in prison.
That's
So
right.
so we have to have the victim and the family of the victim as part of our thought process, as part of what we're thinking about here. Um, I guess similar in a way, you mentioned that you have great friends from inside.
Yes.
Have you had to work through some of that on your own, being aware of what this person did, and did that impact some of your own thoughts of, do I need to be a little guarded in my friendship? Do I just go fully on my friendship? How about that for you personally, knowing what these people did and still pursuing that friendship with them? How about that for you individually?
Well, for me personally, I don't care what they've done. I just don't care what they've done. That's between them and the Lord. That's between them and the victim's family and the courts and those things. I don't care. That is a man that God created with purpose. And I'm just going to love them. I'm just going to love them. I'm just going to try to help them walk through whatever it is they're trying to walk through. Now I will say this, Warren, I had a period of time at the local level where I was conflicted at times with sexual offenders, people who were convicted of sex crimes with adults or children or whatever, and I struggled with that honestly for a little bit, but the bottom line is I had to get myself to the point where I understood that they too were God's creation, and I didn't ever want to know the situation or the things that led them to do what they did. I just knew what they did. And the only reason I knew, honestly, is because they kept those men in a separate area of the facility, and they're in a pod to themselves.
Sure.
But I found, as I began to go regularly and visit with them and take other men to go in and visit with them, and this is going to be crazy, but they were some of the most receptive to the gospel. They were some of the most, and maybe it's because they felt that strong need for forgiveness, because they know what they did was wrong. They know what they did was terribly wrong. And I think that may have driven a greater need for forgiveness. And so they were hungry for the gospel. And right now at DeKalb County Jail, that particular pod is one of the most spirit-filled rooms in the whole place.
Mm-hmm.
But I had to get past that. It was difficult for me because, and society is, well, maybe not as much as it used to be. It's almost becoming accepted in some areas now. But people just look at that differently. And
Yeah.
and I felt that conviction that I was doing that same thing.
Yeah.
But God loves them too. And you know what? He bled on the cross for them too.
Yeah. That's right. That's
Feels
right.
that.
And that ultimately we have to remember that
Yes.
there are no exceptions there. And, we sometimes want to, the vengeance factor, right? The revenge, I know what this person did, I know what this person deserves. We put ourselves in the position of judge, jury, executioner. We take God's power basically, and we say that's going to be me. I'm the one to decide.
Right.
And so yeah, I don't know what I would do in that scenario. You've been face to face with stuff I haven't had to deal with, and so I don't know how I would respond to that. I would hope I would do what Jesus wants me to do,
Yeah.
but I'm a fallen man just like the rest of us. So,
Brother, our humanity gets in the way sometimes,
yeah.
and in the Kairos, and that's one of the prison organizations ministries that I serve in. Um, they are very intentional to tell us as we're forming a team and as we bring new people in onto the Kairos teams, not to go search on the website of the corrections department and find out what a person did, because then your humanity gets in the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, what we need to understand is just basically, look, they're incarcerated for whatever they did. They're receiving a punishment for that, but it's our job to point them towards Jesus. It's our job to offer them the gift of salvation that Jesus offers to them. To
Mhm.
make them understand that um, that's for whosoever.
Yeah.
Whosoever is very, very broad. That means everybody.
Yeah. There's no
Um,
asterisk that says unless you're incarcerated.
that's exactly right.
Well,
That is
we wouldn't have any. We wouldn't have so much of Paul's writing. Like if you're not allowed to do that, so much of the book that we read and study, he was an incarcerated man.
he was.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was.
You talked
Yeah.
about putting together teams. What kind of uh, I'm not even sure the right words for this. How does somebody get involved? Like if somebody says, you know what, I think I might want to do this. Do they just go to their local church? Do they go to different organizations? How does somebody get involved to do this kind of work if they want?
So it's kind of different at the different levels. So let's talk about the local level, maybe the municipal or the county level. You can just go right to that facility and ask about what kind of programs they have. Most
Okay.
all local facilities have a ministry program where they have teams of folks go in. And of course, you have to do a background check and those type
Sure.
of things to make sure that you're qualified. But just for example, out here at DeKalb County, we have a large number of people involved. So we have teams inside the facility on Monday night, on Thursday night, and on Sunday afternoon,
Hmm.
sharing the gospel with those men and women out there. I don't do any ministry to the women, but we have a women's team that does that. So the local level is fairly simple, fairly straightforward. When you start getting to the state and federal levels, that's when you get into the programs like Kairos. Kairos is an international prison ministry, and it's in most states here in the U.S. Um, and you can go to the Kairos, Kairos, prisonministry.org, I believe is the website, and you can find the facilities that have a Kairos team that serves that facility. Just for example, at St. Clair, we have a team from this area, and that's who serves that prison. And so what we do twice a year is we will assemble a team of men and then a support team of women and men um, who go through a usually 8 to 10 week team building, meetings before going in for the what is basically a fourth day weekend. So anywhere, most of the places where there is a corrections facility, you can find a church somewhere nearby that is involved in that
Yeah. Yeah.
or has people involved in it. So
And we're not that we would recommend that somebody is going into this in order to receive, so to speak. Like, we're not doing it to get a gain, but I'm sure that you as an individual person have grown, and that the other people who do this work have grown. What are some stories or some examples of that? How does this change the person doing the ministering work? What happens to them as an individual person?
Warren, gosh, that is so hard to describe, but when I'll put it this way. When you go in just for example, for a Kairos weekend, and you're there with those men for 3.5 days, and you see the demeanor, you see the just the attitude of these men on the first day when you go in, and they're not very trusting. They're not really sure even why you're there. Why did you come here?
Yeah. What do you want? Yeah.
Yeah, well, what are you here for?
Yeah.
And you watch the room change throughout the weekend, and you watch the Holy Spirit begin to work on these men. And when they when they start, they're rigid and they're like this. And as the weekend goes on, you see them relax, and you see the smiles start to come, and even laughter. And the bond that is built not only between the team members and the participants, but between participants. We have seen opposing gang members come together.
Hmm.
We have seen opposing gang members leave their gangs after a Kairos weekend.
Wow.
But and that's really the thing, and it makes my hair stand off my arms just thinking about it. Just to watch God work, just to
Yeah.
watch God work in the lives of some men who probably have never even heard the name Jesus before.
Yeah. Yeah. Or if they
Um,
have, they've only heard it as a curse. They've only heard it. They've never heard the actual who this man is.
yeah,
Why did he? Yeah, they've never heard that for sure. Yeah, that's pretty amazing to have the opposing gang members. And I like how you were describing, at the beginning, all sitting back rigid and everything. And it kind of ties back to earlier some of the stereotypes. So when you were mentioning the stereotypes uh, of of incarcerated men, and how do we get past that? How do we deal with that? I lead some of live events here in Colorado. We go up into the mountains. We spend a couple days together, and we've had we've had people there who have been in prison in the past. It's not one of the questions I ask on my intake form because I don't care.
there
And
you go.
we have guys with long hair, short hair, tattoos, no tattoos, don't care. If you're here, if you want to get better as a man, if you want to dig a little bit more into what the Bible says and how we're supposed to live our lives, and that's all that matters to me. That's all I care about. And yeah, so it's pretty cool to hear some of those stories. And
So,
like I said, I don't think anybody's going into the work just because they're like, this is what I'm going to get out of it. But we do learn and we do grow in those situations.
well, and I got to share this with you real quick too. One of the things with my involvement at St. Clair is I get the opportunity to go down a couple of times a month. They have a Wednesday night worship service, and that's where the 150 guys will show up, and they call it Outmate Night. They don't
Okay.
call it Inmate Night. They call it Outmate Night.
Yeah.
Uh, and it's church on Wednesday night, basically, is what it is. And Warren, I'll tell you what, I have gone down there multiple times with just troubled and burdened, and maybe things not going well at work, or not messed up in my family. Just I got stuff, man. I'm really heavily burdened, and go down there and experience the presence of the Lord inside the prison in their church, and have a man who is locked up for life preach a word to me that heals me, and I go
Mhm.
home restored.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's crazy.
It is.
And then when I share those kind of things with people here on the outside, they're like, "You did what?" And I was like, "See, that you have the wrong idea who those men are."
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
And God uses everyone.
He does.
Yeah.
If we will open ourselves up, and that's what those men have done, Warren, is they have just surrendered. They have surrendered in a way that many of us on the outside haven't even realized is possible yet.
Why do you think that is? Why does that seem like somebody on the inside might be able to surrender easier than somebody on the outside?
Uh, well, I think part of it is that they maybe don't have all the distractions that we have. We have a lot of things pulling us away. Now they have things there's bad stuff that goes on. I don't
Sure.
want to paint the
Sure.
wrong picture. I
Yep.
mean, there are stabbings, there are murders, there is overdose, there's stuff that goes on in parts of that community down there. I don't want anybody to get the wrong idea. Um, so they have those distractions, but we have a lot more out here. We have a lot more things pulling us away from the Lord, plain and simple. We have many more things that have the ability to get higher on our priority list than our relationship with the Lord.
Yeah.
And so they're you know good, bad, or indifferent. The result is the same, and they are submitted, and they're committed, and they are all about making disciples inside the prison.
Mm. Yeah. And we're all called to be doing that everywhere. And you're right. Outside, we have so many distractions.
Yeah,
Just literally everything can be a distraction. And we're called equally to be making disciples all the time.
we are.
And, how often are we doing that? How
Yeah,
do we, somebody might say, well, I don't want to share something at work because I might offend somebody or I might upset somebody. And you say, well, if we could follow the lead, so to speak, of an incarcerated man sharing the gospel, we could probably share it at work too. We could probably follow that lead.
yeah, yeah. I mean, here's the deal. If you share the gospel at work, whoever you're sharing it with is probably not going to stab you.
Yeah, that's a great way to work. Yeah, probably not.
you know, in that environment, that is a real possibility.
Yeah.
It is a
Yeah.
real possibility. I had one young man tell me a story. I met him in the church, and I was drawn to him, and I really wanted to hear how he got there because as this church has grown, it's grown with a lot of young men. And that's been Tommy's intentionality in getting out there and seeking out the young men to point to Jesus. But this kid told me, he said that he was in his just standing right outside his cell in his block, and he heard Tommy coming down the hall, giving a church call. And he was saying, "Come as you are, just come as you are." And this kid said, "I'm standing there and I've got a knife and a phone in one pocket, and I got dope in the other pocket. And this man is telling me, come as you are."
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "I walked back in my cell because I thought I wanted to go and I was going to take all this stuff out of my pocket. And next thing you know, Tommy's standing in the doorway. And he said, come as you are, brother." And he did. And through Tommy's discipleship to him, he laid down the dope, and
Yeah.
he got rid of his phone, and he got rid of his knife, and he began to get other young men to come and plug into the church. And so, you know, what does that look like for us?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Are you willing to just go as you are? Are you willing to just go? Yeah, come as you are. I've heard people ask over the years and talk about the idea of if somebody is addicted, you mentioned addiction earlier. If somebody's addicted, do they have to get clean in order to go to church? And my response is no, church is how you get clean. like every one of us goes in with something. We're not, nobody's perfect. None of
That's right.
us are perfect. And so we go there, and that's the vehicle. Like that, we come out clean. We don't go in clean. Jesus cleans us. And so
Yeah.
yeah, the idea of come as you are, we mean that literally to anybody who but might be listening, and if they haven't gone to church for a while, go like as you are. That's the perfect state. That just go as you are. Yeah, exactly.
I tell them when I go to the county jail out here, and I invite men to come to my church. I invite them, and I tell them, I don't care if you show up wearing the stripes that you're wearing tonight. You're going to be loved and you're going to be accepted and drawn in, and we're going to love on you. We want you right where you are because that's where Jesus wants you, right where you are.
Yeah.
And he'll take care of the cleaning up. We can't do that. We're going to tell you about him, and we're going to point you in his direction, and he's going to do all that for you.
Yeah.
So, but I've sat in churches before, Warren, where if a person walked in, maybe not dressed as well as maybe some people thought they should. Maybe they hadn't bathed in a few days because they had nowhere to bathe.
Yep.
And that's a critical moment. That is a moment in time that person's life can be forever changed by how we accept and receive them.
Yeah.
And we fail at that more than we get it wrong, than we get it right, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah, it is unfortunate, and it's all too common for sure. And that person most likely won't give church another chance. That was probably a one-time deal. And they said, my whole life I've been thinking maybe I'm finally at that point. I'll give this church thing a try. I'll walk in, and then if all they feel is judgment and condemnation, and even perhaps outright told, you need to go get dressed up or you need to go take a shower or something, they won't be back. And we have to remember that as brothers, as Christians, that we got to remember that and take that seriously.
Yeah, when I came back into the church about nearly 23 years ago now, it was at the invitation of my wife. She was not my wife at the time. We had been dating for 1 week, and I was not a good person then. I'm just flat out with you. I was not a good person. I had a terrible reputation in the community because of along with my addiction. I was also, on the other side of that, I was causing people to become addicted. But she invited me into this church, and I remember pulling up there the first day, and she got out of the car, and my son got out of the car, and her 2 kids, and I sat there just gripping the steering wheel, dreading what it was going to be like walking in that church, because this is not a big community. And I knew that every single person in there knew they knew my history. They knew my past. And so that was a critical moment for me. Yeah. But I finally let go of the steering wheel, and I walked into this church, and I have never felt that kind of love before in my life, the way they received me, knowing who I was, knowing the things that I had done, and they didn't care. And now, all these years later, the Lord has just blessed me to be able to pass that along to other people. But what if they had rejected me?
Right.
What if they had asked me to leave? And that was my fear. I tell people all the time, I was afraid either the roof was going to fall in or they were going to ask me to leave, one of the two. Yeah. But neither of those happened.
Yeah.
So I say that to say, when we see that person walk in that doesn't look like us, that's not dressed like us, that is such an important opportunity, because we don't know what God can do with that person's life in the future. We just don't know. So we really need to take those moments seriously. Golly, I hate to even say this. I had a lady in a church one time tell me, because I was always bringing guys from the jail into the church, and she said, I know those guys have to go to church somewhere. Why does it have to be here? That breaks my heart to this day.
Yeah.
So anyhow, we need to take those opportunities seriously.
Yeah.
Because they can be life-changing. Was for me.
And we don't know where things are going to go in the future. Working with men as I do, one of the things that gets brought up a lot is this idea of legacy. And legacy is such an interesting concept for men, because we're the pride part of us, the ego part of us, is very drawn to legacy conversations. But legacy is up to God, not to us. And we don't know if one of those men that you brought from jail into church, if he had that church experience, and his legacy is that he in one day in the future is going to mention something to his grandson, and his grandson is going to share it with somebody who will become the president of the United States one day. Like, we have no idea.
That's
And
exactly.
and that would be his legacy. He never planned that. He never built that. He never set out to create that as a legacy. So yeah, we need to be so careful with that. And that is a heartbreaking phrase, like you said. Why do they have to go here? Why shouldn't they?
Yeah.
Like we should. Why would they go anywhere else? We should almost view it like that. Come, open arms. Everybody. Yeah.
Incidentally, one of those men who I brought in was Gary Cootie.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah. So and now, yeah, a legacy, so to speak, that he never would have considered in the past is now the path that he is on, and hopefully through his children, grandchildren, through the following of that, or if not his own direct kids, the friends of families and so on, this whole new future is built, and potentially for hundreds and thousands of people down the line.
Yeah, his entire family, and he does have children.
Okay.
Watch this happen, and it kind of changed them too. So anyhow, yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting as we talked about that. Yeah, Gary was one of the guys. He was one of the ones that I brought in.
Yeah. And that's why, we should have, it would be great if everybody had a dozen stories like that. If everybody who listens to this show found 10, 12 people to invite and bring to church, and then saw what God did in their lives, we could change the world. People talk about, well, I don't like the culture, I don't like politics, I don't like whatever. Well, really, if you want to change the world, bring more people to Jesus. That's ultimately that's what matters. Yeah, we're not going to get political or anything, but voting's important. Great, do it, do your part, do your civic duty, bring more people to Jesus. That's what changes the world. That's ultimately what changes the world.
100%, 100% agree with that. And that we're called. We're called to do that.
That it's a direct instruction.
Yeah, I mean, that was, I tell people all the time too. When I was raising my kids, the last thing that I told them was what I really wanted them to remember when they were leaving the house. I think right before Jesus ascended, the last thing he told his disciples, he really meant that, and that was the most important thing. And that was to go into the world and make disciples and to share the gospel. And so that's instruction for us too.
Yep. Yeah, it's pretty clear that's not one where like, well, maybe this translation of the Bible is different. Maybe this. No, that one's pretty clear. That one's pretty clear.
The old saying is, it wasn't the great suggestion.
Yeah, right. Exactly. Right. So we're getting close to the end of our hour here. I always like to leave a little bit of time for something maybe that we missed. So our overall idea, ministering to incarcerated men, what's something that we want to make sure we get to, maybe a final point, something you want to leave with, or something you wanted to come back to for people who are thinking about this as a topic, thinking about this as an idea. What do you want to make sure we're leaving guys with when it comes to ministering to incarcerated men?
Those men are important. And again, that was another thing that Jesus said we should be doing. He said we should be visiting men in prison, and I take that very seriously. They're going to get out one day, and what they're going to come out of incarceration with is whatever was poured into them while they were there. And there's pretty much two paths that they can have. They can have prison mentality poured into them during their time incarcerated, or they can have Jesus mentality poured into them. And for me, with my kids and my grandkids, roaming the world, I want men coming out of there with Jesus poured into them, so that, it just makes the world safer. It makes the world a better place.
Yeah.
Um, and we just really need to understand, Warren, that they're not all bad men. They're not all bad men.
Yeah.
They're just not. And we all have a place. And I want to kind of talk about Kairos just for 1 second.
Sure.
One of the beauties of Kairos Prison Ministry is not everybody who's involved has to go inside the prison. On a Kairos weekend, there's a support team that stays on the outside that cooks all the food, and that prays over each of the speakers as they're speaking from a distance, that kind of handles all the support stuff. There are one of the big things with Kairos is cookies. On a weekend, we'll take 700 dozen cookies into the prison for that 3.5 days. And we ask people to do those, to make those. So there are so many ways that you can participate in that if going inside the walls of a prison is not your cup of tea.
Yeah.
So Kairos is really, really good at that, from a broader level, from a state and federal level. So, and the fact is, not everybody's cut out to go inside the walls of a prison. Some people would be scared out of their wits to walk across, the yard of a maximum security prison. That's just not their deal. But there's other ways.
Yeah. I want to echo on something you said just a second ago, and you said they're going to get out one day.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like people also to keep in mind the guys who are in there for life are also getting out one day, so to speak. This life is not the end. And so if there's a small part that you can play, we don't save anybody. That's not our role. We're not the savior. But if there's a small part you can play in the eternity of a man, you should take advantage of that opportunity. So yes, the guys are going to get out onto the street in this world right now, but every single person in that prison, every man in that prison, their lives on earth end at some point, but that's not the ending. So if there's a part we can play, we should definitely play that.
Absolutely. Yep. It's perfect.
You mentioned Kairos. If guys want to learn more, is that where they should go? Where would you recommend guys go? You talked about, local prisons, but is there a place online, or is it just Kairos that you would recommend?
Yes, Kairos has a website, and you can go on there and you can find out when the upcoming weekends all over the U.S. and wherever they are else in the world, and track down a team that you can be a part of.
Awesome.
It's very, very well organized, very very well known organization, and so yeah, that's pretty easy deal to get involved.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. That's important that people know, so they're not just listening, but they have an option to take an action if they want to, and they know where to go. So Randall, I appreciate all of your time today. This is a pretty important discussion to have. It's not common for people to think about or talk about, but it's really important for us to be aware of this stuff. And thank you for your perspective and your time here today.
Well, I appreciate the invite. It was a pleasure. I enjoyed it very much.
Thanks. Cool. All right. Have a great day.
All right. You too, brother.